Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Our first speaker is not here yet. Oh, are you here? Oh, okay. Okay, that's good. All right, perfect. So, just a reminder to everyone, the talks are 10 minutes and 2 minutes for discussion. And if we have time at the very end, we can get all of our speakers back up. So our first speaker is Willow Batista from the Environmental Defense Fund.
Okay, I don't know how to use the remote, so I'm just going to sit over here. Yeah, so I'm going to be presenting some research we did on factors that can help an innovation or any management change to scale from the level of a pilot or a couple of pilot sites out and up throughout the whole target geography. So everyone wants their solution to scale, but the question is how. Unfortunately, successful innovations rarely just catch on and scale on their own. An example I like to give of this is marine protected areas, which, are pretty well. It's pretty well agreed that they have many conservation benefits at the local scale when they're implemented, designed and implemented correctly. Yet, after more than 20 years of trying to implement them broadly, with targets of 20% of the ocean covered in under marine protected areas, we're still at just 2.8% of the global ocean protected. So, what can be done to facilitate scaling? So we went to the literature to answer this question, and we did sort of a comprehensive literature review across a broad range of disciplines to empirically evaluate factors that are thought to improve the chances of successfully scaling a pilot project. So through that process, and I want to say we included literature from disciplines from as diverse as marketing to policy to conservation and healthcare. Pretty much tried to capture every piece of advice we could find on that. And through that process, we collected actually a list of 69 putative scaling principles. So, in other words, there's a lot of advice out there on what one might do to get their innovation or their project to scale. But what we found was that most of this advice came from was either theoretical or came from small scale cases. And so there hadn't been any statistical analyses to see which of these 69 putative principles are actually statistically associated with greater degrees of scaling success. So we decided, and also we felt like 69 was probably too many for your average manager to try to implement in their project. So we went back to the literature and we collected a set of 56 case studies of varying degrees of scaling success. So some that had a successful pilot project and then just never caught on at all, never spread to another site, and others that had successfully scaled throughout their entire target geography. We sorted these cases into 4 success categories based on the degree of scaling success reached, as I just mentioned. And in order to not make subjective decisions about what was more successful or less successful, when you're not at the two ends of the extreme, we decided to use self replication as a key distinguishing factor. So, if a successful pilot project had caught on and become self replicating, such that the initiating organization was no longer deeply involved, did no longer had to be deeply involved either financially or with human capacity to get the innovation to spread to the next site and the next site and the next site, we called that self-replicating. And so we had 4 categories, and so 1 was a scaling failure, 4 was a full success where the innovation had scaled to its entire target geography, but was and had become self-replicating. And in between, we have it scaled a little bit, but it didn't become self-replicating, and it scaled a little bit, but it did become self-replicating. So once we sorted our 56 case studies into the 4 different degrees of scaling success, we evaluated the relationship of each of our 69 putative principles to the degree of success reached in the case studies. We looked at the presence and the absence of each of the 69 principles, and we were conservative in our scoring. We also included a category for unknown because in a lot of cases, authors aren't talking about they didn't do this lit review, so they're not explicitly talking about these 69 principles, and so there were a lot of times when a principle just simply wasn't mentioned at all in a case, and we didn't want to assume that meant it wasn't there. We also did another layer of analysis where we created a score, a weighting system based on the importance to scaling as stated by the case study author, so that we could explore how that affected our results. And finally, we also explored correlations between the 69 principles within the 56 case studies. So through that analysis, we found 23 principles to be statistically significantly correlated with higher degrees of scaling success. And we found a subset of 6 of them that interact with each other to explain 40% of the success score variance. So what does that mean? It means that we found 23 principles that if you're a manager and you have an innovation of some kind, you have a management change that you think can make an improvement for conservation, that if you can try to ensure that as many of these 23 principles as possible are present in your project, that your innovation is more likely to become self-replicating and to catch on at additional sites. So here's the first of the 2 boring slides where I just list the 23 principles. You can see that there are actually principles. Another thing we did to make the principles sort of more digestible is we created these 10 decision categories, or sort of that sort of follow the phases of a project. So there's the innovation design, pilot site selection, creation of your project team, identification of your target audience, and post-pilot project efforts. And you can see that there are scaling principles that came out as statistically significant in all of these decision categories across all of these project phases. And then here are the remaining 12 of the 23 principles that came out as statistically significant. So, and again, you can see here that there's principles that fall into two more decision categories, providing actual direct scaling support and creating an actual explicit scaling strategy. So I'm happy, I don't have a ton of time, I'm happy to go through these 23 principles with you after the talk, but in the meantime, there were 3 overarching lessons that came out of this research. The first is that scaling must be considered at all stages of a project, from the design of the innovation all the way through the post-project follow-up and provision of long-term support systems. So scaling isn't something that just begins, that you're thinking about scaling cannot just begin when your pilot project is done. The next message is that managing the surrounding context that you're working in and actively removing barriers to scaling can significantly improve outcomes, significantly improve the chances that your project will become self-replicating. And finally, deliberate attention to scaling methods, marketing and dissemination efforts, and long-term monitoring of scaling progress. So not just is my innovation working, but is it scaling, are vital for ensuring scaling success. So these things sort of point to the need to create an explicit scaling strategy in addition to your regular project strategy. So in sum, scaling will not happen automatically and cannot be an afterthought. Since we have done this analysis and we've published it, I'll put the link back up in a second. Since then we've developed a set of tools that help inform managers on how to implement each of these 23 principles that came out as significant in our analysis, because basically just knowing what the 23 principles are is great, but you also probably want to know, how do I implement this in my site? So we've created a scaling guidance document that has how-to guidance on each of the 23 principles, a scaling strategy template, and a scaling principles checklist to help you keep track of your progress. And if you're interested in accessing or utilizing those tools, you can feel free to contact me. That's my email, and that's my Twitter. And I'll take questions.
Thank you, Willow. Yeah, so we have plenty of time for questions for the next 2 minutes. So yeah.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Good talk. I wonder if you could give us any idea of the relative value or relative importance of your principles?
You mean of the 23? Yeah, so the first analysis we did is a Fisher's exact test analysis, which does not relate the principles to each other, so it doesn't give you any relative value. But after doing that, we did a regression tree analysis to get at relationships between the principles. And basically, I'd be happy to talk to you more about the details, but basically, this says that these 6 principles are, I hesitate to say this, but like slightly more important than the rest on the list of 23. And what it really says is that if you have this one plus 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 this one, you're in the best shape you can be in.
Any other questions?
Hi, you said you'd put up where you've published it?
Oh, so sorry. Yes, thank you. I put it on the first slide. Note to self, put it on the last slide.
All right, if there are no more questions, thank you, Willow.
Thanks.
Our next speaker is Paulette Baino from the University of Guyana.